You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture.
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward
for inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up. We're going to tell you a little bit about our journey to Los Angeles and attending the Kendrick Lamar and SZA concert. And then later on the pod, Missy and I sat down with Professor Corinna Lain, who's got a new book out titled Secrets of the Killing State, The Untold Story of Lethal Injection. This is a fascinating conversation that we have with Professor Lain. So stay tuned. You're not going to want to miss it. Hello there, Missy.
What?
Hello there, Missy.
What? Eh?
Having some hearing problems, are we?
I can't hear you over the ringing in my ears.
The normal ringing, or is this new ringing?
New ringing.
Okay.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yes, this would be the new ringing that occurs when you attend a concert at my age and forget the noise filtering like AirPods that you were supposed to take. So
I do remember that moment as we walked into SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles to see Kendrick Lamar and SZA, and this look of horror in your eyes, and you voiced, "I forgot my earplugs."
Yes, there are some, Amazon has some great little hidden, like nobody can really see them and know, that you're old like that, but you can put these little earplugs in and it kind of filters some of the noise out because my ears are super sensitive and I'm old. And yes, I have tinnitus. I call it tinnitus. The doctor says tinnitus. Anyways, so yes, my ears are still ringing. They have not stopped ringing since we left the concert.
Well, I'm so sorry. I'll speak a little louder if that's no, sorry.
Yes. So here's the thing. Like before we left to go, if you're a regular listener, you know that last week we talked about we were going to the Kendrick Lamar concert in Los Angeles with our two boys. And so getting ready to go, you do all the things.
Oh, yeah, all the things.
You got your hair done. I had the grays covered, and then I've recently started going to this, shall we say, like this, I don't know, spa place where you kind of go and like they have light treatments and massaging chairs and like this like sauna
taking
things.
care of yourself, self-care, got it.
All this gimmicky things that women do. We live in a college town, so it's a lot of college girls and then people like me who are trying to still be, younger.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, not working. Anyways, so I go in before we leave because again, I'm going to do the red light, do the steam, like get the facial
get it
treatment,
all done,
like right,
get the works
right before Kendrick sees me. I mean, I have to, and so I go into the little girl, little undergrad at the counters, like trying to sell me this lotion, as they always do. And she's like, "Oh, my mom loves it."
Oh, that hurts.
And I looked at her and I said, "Sweetie, I'm going to do you a favor here." I was like, "Don't say that again."
My mom loves it.
I get it. My kids are older than you, but still, just don't say that. She was so embarrassed.
Well, she didn't say my grandma loves it.
All right, that's nice. Yeah. So then just tonight went out to a restaurant for dinner before we recorded this opening, and we were sitting out on the patio having a lovely time. And then it got to be like the normal dinner hour, and they cranked the music up.
Dang kids!
So then we had to leave.
Well, to be fair, it was 4:30. Oh, my
Anyways, so yes, here we are just back from vacation. Again, went to see Kendrick Lamar. Do we want to report on that for a second?
Oh, well, first of all, we had a great time. I mean, the concert was just tremendous. Kendrick Lamar is one of the greatest entertainers and lyricists of our time. SZA, beautiful vocals. I mean, just the choreography, you talked about that during the concert, was really incredible. So overall, I mean, it was great. DJ Mustard opened up with a 30-minute set. And I mean, just, it was terrific. And the crowd was into it. But we've got to talk about the big surprise of the concert.
Yes.
So we're sitting there, and SZA is singing this beautiful ballad, and all of a sudden, from underneath the stage, another artist appears out of nowhere. And who was it, Missy?
Well, I'm guessing our audience is never going to guess who it was.
There's no way. No way.
It,
Wasn't on our bingo card.
it wasn't on our bingo card. I'm curious. I would love to know how many listeners know who this is, even when we say it. But yes, Justin Bieber
Justin Bieber
emerged from the stage.
It was like we all looked at one and go, "Is that Justin Bieber?"
And all of the women who were like just younger than me, I mean, went nuts. Nuts. It was so funny. But yeah, and the even funnier thing was after the concert was over and we're all trying to like text our friends, about who was there. Every one of them were like, "Oh yeah, we know." Like it had already been all over
over
X
social media,
and TikTok and all of this. So, anyways, it was a fun experience. Legit, my ears are still ringing. It was fun. It was a powerful show.
Yeah, absolutely.
He, like you said, he is an amazing artist, lyricist. The imagery on the screen, the choreography of the dancers was truly, I don't know how to explain it, powerful with the messaging in communicating about people who've been oppressed and who are just trying to find a way to fight back. I don't know what another word for that is, but to speak to the systems that have held them down.
There seemed to be this, what I would describe as a dark beauty to the presentation, because he was dealing, in the choreography and the messaging with very deep issues, but communicating that in a really interesting and poetic way, while at the same time being inspirational in doing it, but also being honest about it. And that's the thing that I think everybody loves about Kendrick Lamar's music, is that he's honest, he is authentic, he does not shy away from any topics whatsoever. But his music, even though is difficult to listen to at times, just the lyrics, because he's dealing with such difficult topics, is also inspirational, and it builds community. And so it was just a great night overall. I had a great time.
It really was. So and now you're about to head off on another assignment.
I am.
That we're not going to talk about right now.
Correct.
But you will. Come back and talk about it. You were very excited about it.
Yep. Leaving this week to go on an airplane, and got an assignment for the entire next week. We'll be reporting about it next week on next week's pod. But it is one of these moments that I am not only excited about, but I think it's going to be transformative for me personally. And I cannot wait to share the stories that come out of this report.
And at this point, I will provide the fine print of this, which lets everyone know, because I don't like to say when you're going out of town, that we have security measures in place. There are cameras all around this house. We have a security system with motion detectors and alarms. We live in Oklahoma, so the chances are all my neighbors are packing. And we also have skunks.
Especially our 90-year-old neighbor across the street. She's packing.
100%. And we have skunk patrol. So if you're willing to brave any of that, and I will probably have people staying with me. So if you're willing to brave all of that, to come over and, try any shenanigans or break it in, go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So because of my assignment next week and this incredible interview that we had with author Corinna Lain, we decided to forego the outro and just concentrate on the introduction, or the intro, this week. And so, this week we sat down with author Corinna Lain, who's a professor at the School of Law at Richmond University. And she's got a new book out, Missy. It's titled Secrets of the Killing State, The Untold Story of Lethal Injection.
So I know you had this book with us on vacation, and your plan was to read it on the way back, which you did. Mm-hmm. And just were blown away by this book. I didn't really get a chance to get my hands on it in time to read it thoroughly like you did. But you just kept telling me, you've got to read this book. You've got to read this book. You're not going to believe this. And kept telling me about it. And it's such a kind of a different topic than what we have kind of focused in on before. But this was a really powerful, I feel like, interview, a powerful book. Like you mentioned in the interview, just a must read.
Yeah, when I picked it up and started reading it, obviously this is a very, very dark topic, a lot of heaviness to the conversation and to the read at large. But as I opened up the pages and began to read Professor Lane's account, first of all, I want to say this. Professor Lain does a great job. She's not arguing for or against the death penalty overall, the ethics of the death penalty. What she is talking about is basically facts. And this is what's happening with executions that use lethal injection as the means to execute prisoners.
Hmm.
I was stunned.
Hmm.
There's a lot of assumptions, me included, about the process of lethal injection. I had no idea that this was as convoluted and
Haphazard.
haphazard. That's a great way to put it. Haphazardly performed, uh, around the country in different states, and different states do it differently. And the fact that it's not based in science or what she calls in the interview faux science is just absolutely mind blowing to me. I was really blown away, not only by the stories of botched executions, but how we got here, as well as how it's being conducted across the country.
Right. So, as a result, again, this was such an impactful story. We decided the interview is a little bit longer than normal. We wanted our listeners to be able to hear, um, the better part of that and hear about this book and hear from Professor Lain.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, this conversation with Professor Lain about her book is really just challenging, but at the same time, it's so educational. And at the end, it's really inspirational, and it's inspired us to get more involved in trying to contact our legislators and our governor about the process of execution in our home state of Oklahoma. So, it is a fascinating book. You're going to learn a lot in the interview. And then after the interview, please, please pick up this book. It's titled Secrets of the Killing State: The Untold Story of Lethal Injection. As a former college baseball player, I know firsthand the challenges athletes face. That's why we're proud to support Christian Athlete Circles, a ministry that is creating spaces and resources to accompany athletes on their faith journey, wherever they are. To learn more about Christian Athlete Circles, go to ChristianAthleteCircles.org. Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us. Professor Corinna Lain is the S.D. Roberts and Sandra Moore Professor of Law at the University of Richmond School of Law. Professor Corinna's new book, Secrets of the Killing State: The Untold Story of Lethal Injection, pulls back the curtain on this clandestine punishment practice, presenting a view of lethal injection that states have worked hard to hide. Professor Corinna, thank you so much for being on the show, and welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Thanks so much for having me, Mitch. I'm just really excited to be here.
So, Professor, first of all, congratulations on the book. It's incredible. Mitch and I have just been kind of, I don't know, trying to soak up and digest all of the information within it.
She took us to class is what she did.
And not
she really
super
did.
surprisingly, once again, we find ourselves in our state, sort of
I
at
know.
the center of much of the information you're
Good old
bringing.
Oklahoma.
Yes. Change that sign on the days of embarrassment. But anyways.
Back to zero.
So before we talk about specifics on the book, I just want to know what inspired you to write this. It's heavy.
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'm a death penalty scholar. I've been studying the death penalty, researching and writing about it for 18 years now. And this book took 7 years. And so I was writing about the death penalty for over a decade when I started. There's a professional side of why I wrote it, and there's a personal side. Which is perfectly suited for your program to talk about. Very inspired. On the professional side, as a death penalty researcher, I kept seeing lethal injection executions in the paper, and it raised a question of why are states so breathtakingly bad at this thing that we do, to our beloved pets every single day. We know how animal euthanasia works. We know how physician-assisted suicide works. We put people under and cut their chest open, every day. And so I just couldn't understand why it was so done so badly
Yeah.
so often. And so I started researching about that. And I really, 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 really did not want to write a book on lethal injection. And I even resisted writing the article that insisted upon being a book. But once I got into the topic and it was clear that it was a book, I actually set it down. That's how much I did not want to write this book from the beginning. And I was at a law professor conference in January 2018. And the way law professors relate to each other is like, hi, how are you? What are you working on? You know, because we're a bunch of nerds.
Sure.
So that's what we do.
We do the same thing at
And
preachers' conferences too, Professor.
it's true. It's true. And so like everyone was asking. And it was really stressful because my world is a lot of what have you done lately, you know, publish or perish. And so after one particularly stressful little lunch, I skipped the 1 o'clock session and went back up to my hotel room. And I am a person of faith. I call myself a free range chicken Christian.
I love that.
And now I do as well. It's amazing.
So, you know, I wasn't raised in the church, but I had an encounter with the Lord when I was in the army, and have been the Lord's ever since. And so I got on my knees and prayed and said, you know, Lord, I don't want to write a book on lethal injection, and here are all the ways this would be bad for me. And but if I knew it was from you, you know, if I knew it was from you, that would change everything. But Lord, please speak clearly, because I'm really not inclined to do it. And I was kneeling against the bed, and just, you know, the little side table was right there. So I just like reached over to see if there was like a Gideon's Bible there. I was in a hotel room in San Diego, and there was. And I just flipped it open, and I took a picture of it, which I actually keep on my wall. So I'll read it to you. It opened like the top of the page. I didn't even have to scroll down. The top of the page was Psalm 45. And here's what it said. My heart is overflowing with a good theme. I recite my composition concerning the king. My tongue is the pen of a ready writer.
Wow.
Wow, I have chills.
And
Yeah, no kidding.
I cried.
Yeah.
I was like, what? And took a picture of it to remember the moment, and said, all right, looks like I'm going to write a book on lethal injection.
Yeah,
I think
what
he
a
put
story.
a red receipt on that text.
I tell ya.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Well,
I'll
I am
tell
so
ya.
glad that you wrote the book, and thanks for sharing that inspirational story. And that is one thing that I really appreciate about the entirety of the book, Professor, is that you could have filled it with a lot of legal jargon. You could have filled it with a lot of facts, and it is. It is incredibly researched, filled with a lot of facts, and you did your homework. There's absolutely no question about that. But a big part of this book is the humanization of the individuals who are executed by lethal injection. And you acknowledge the importance of the victims and the stories that are associated with these crimes, but you also have this beautiful way of humanizing the situation as well. And one of those stories begins the book, and that is the retelling of the story of Clayton Lockett's execution here in Oklahoma. And you keep going back to that story. Why was that story so important in telling this book?
You know, I chose Clayton Lockett for two reasons, really. And the first was Clayton Lockett's execution in Oklahoma is really exceptional. There has never been anything like it. There will never be anything like it in this way, I think. And that is when the execution was botched, the governor at the time caught a lot of flack. And she said, you know what, we're gonna have an independent investigation. We're gonna find out what happened. If you read the book, then you know this is like a kind of
Right.
you know, par for the course. They say this. But then she appointed a member of her own cabinet to lead it. So that's not independent.
No.
Mhm.
And the member of the cabinet was the person, Department of Public Safety, which is over the Department of Corrections. So it's like, well, that's not independent.
Right.
And the person had come up from the DOC. So it's like, that's not independent. And he was there, he was a witness at the execution. So it's like nothing about being a material witness in your own investigation says independent. But
Mm-hmm.
the fact that this was an insider really gave us a glimpse of something that I have never seen before. And that is, he conducted the interviews with all of the players and recorded it. And it produced 3,000 pages of transcript.
Yeah.
And those interviews were so enlightening. You know, when you're seeing deposition testimony in the litigation setting, it's very close-lipped, it's very careful. You're just answering the question, you're being very careful. These people were downright chatty,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know, and so we see, for example, the lawyer for the Department of Corrections saying, you know, when asked like, how did you determine the drug? Well, I Googled it. You know, I
Yeah.
just looked online. I went past, I think he said like, I went past the WikiLeaks or whatever it was. And sure, I could have done more, but this was political.
Mm-hmm.
We were getting calls every day, sometimes a couple times a day. Hurry up. That is, you know, that sort of thing you will never find in the litigation setting. And so, you know, it told the story in, well, I was able to tell this story from the mouths of the people who were involved in it.
Yeah.
And so you don't really get a lot of me. I'm not explaining what happened. I'm using them to tell this story. So that was like the main thing. But I think the other thing is it just happened to be this really exceptional opportunity to see a lot of the ways that lethal injection can go wrong.
Right.
And so it really laid the groundwork for the no science that I talk about later, and the drugs that I talk about later, and the indifference. You know, and
Yeah.
so all of those things, it's like, yep,
Yeah.
Clayton Lockett's a nice example. So,
And
so that's why it was chapter 1.
Yeah, you mentioned, you know, the testimony of Googling how to do this. And there was just that happened every chapter. You revealed these things that were just mind blowing to me because there's so many assumptions that are made regarding the process of lethal injection, and they're all wrong. They're all probably not all of them, but a lot of them are wrong that we just think would be, you know, basic knowledge or, you know, processes or standard operating procedure, but they're not. So
let's then stop and talk for a minute about the science, or rather the lack thereof, surrounding lethal injections. You write, one of the best kept secrets of the killing state, lethal injection, is not based on science. Like we've alluded to, we just are mind blown by this. Speak to that a little bit, and why we don't execute prisoners, like you alluded to in the beginning, at least with the same procedures that, and I hate to even equate that,
I know.
that veterinarians use
But-
for
but
animals,
that
or
is-
like you said, assisted suicide.
But she points that out in the book too about why
Yeah.
why we don't do that. So
So
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
we're so excited
No,
about
it's
this.
so
So go ahead.
good. And Missy, I have to say, and I mean, Mitch, this goes to your comment too. I mean, you're saying like, wait, what? You know, it's not this, it's not that. There's so many surprises. That was my experience. And
Mhm.
I'm going through this going, wait, what? I'm supposed to be some kind of death penalty expert
Right.
here. I'm supposed to know all this stuff. How can I not know any of this stuff? And if I don't know this, then guess what? Nobody else knows this either.
Mhm.
And that was actually the reason that once I decided to write the book, I really wanted to make it a book that spoke to the public and not just other academics. I wanted this to be, I mean, it's not going to be a beach read, I'll give you that. But, you know, I wanted it to be something that people would find very readable and
Mhm.
surprisingly readable. And so, you know, there's that piece. Now, Missy, as to your point, the no science, you know, I think part of my research question, you know, we know how to put, our beloved pets down?
Mhm.
Why are they so bad at this? There is an assumption based on, that this is like the same thing that we do to pets. And, and it's not. And for me, one of the surprising things, I don't think it is in the faux science chapter, but is where the prisoners in Tennessee sued under
Yes.
the Humane
Yeah.
Non-Livestock Animal Death Act. And they were like, look, we're animals and we're not livestock. So and that is the animal, that's your Cats and Dogs Act.
Mhm.
That's what that is. And so, they sued, they're saying, treat us like animals, please, because that is actually way better than the death that we are getting. It's just that the death we're getting is under a paralytic that makes it look like we are just drifting to sleep. And so to the no science, I just assumed that it was done like pets, and so I assumed it was veterinary science, right? Like,
Mhm.
surely some guy didn't just make this up off the top of his head.
Guess what?
And I'm like, oh crap, some guy just made this up off the top of his
And that
head.
guy is Chapman? I can't remember.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So this is Oklahoma's Dr. J.
Here we go
Chapman.
again.
He
Ouch.
was a medical
Yeah.
examiner
Mhm.
for Oklahoma. And, I was like, why these drugs? And I researched it and I found an interview that he had done. And he said, I didn't do any research. I just thought about what might be you wanted two drugs. So if one didn't kill him, the other did. And then the interviewer said, well, why did you add a third? And he said, I didn't research it. I mean, why not? Why does it matter why I chose it? And, he described himself as an expert in dead bodies, but not in how to get them that way. Which I think is, I mean, I'm like, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so the fact that this guy, came up with it is pretty, pretty outrageous, I think.
Mhm.
There was some other guy, and I talk about him, he's in one of the end notes. Uh, Dr. Stanley Deutsch, who had come up with a similar thing, but it was actually too late. It was Chapman's
Mhm.
protocol that the legislature passed and did so without committee hearings or a review of scientific literature, and so here again, I'm thinking, you're embarking on this whole new way to execute, to kill someone, and you haven't done any of the most basic things. And so that was quite astounding. And and then we see, like, okay, well, you want to tell yourself this is the end of the Lockett chapter. Okay, well, that was then, this is now.
Mhm.
Surely that,
That was my next question.
Yeah.
For context,
right? Like,
give us a
that's not still happening, right?
Mhm.
And then you get to Lockett, and it's like, no, they're looking on Google,
Mhm.
And by the way, 2024, well, 2022 to 2024, Arizona stopped executions. It had 3 botched executions. By the way, spent $1.5 million on drugs for those 3 executions and botched all 3.
Mhm.
Anyway,
Yeah.
but they stopped executions. The newly elected governor said, we're going to have an independent review, and appointed a retired federal judge to lead it. After the election last fall, that retired federal judge was fired. The DOC did a review of itself and said, we're great. Now give us our warrant. And we're going to start with volunteer. So there's no one on the other side.
Mhm.
But I think the reason I mention this is that the retired federal judge released his interim report, and he found prison personnel looking on Wikipedia on the eve of an execution to find out how much of the drugs to inject. So, for anyone who wants to
Yeah.
assure themselves that, this isn't happening anymore, I'm sorry, but like, that's not the case.
And Corinna, one of the things you do consistently in the book is you remind readers that this is one of the ultimate powers that the state executes. No pun intended. But this is the ultimate power that a state has over its citizens to take the life of an individual based upon a decision by a court. This should be at the height of research and making certain that these aren't botched, that these go without any hesitancy whatsoever, or not hesitancy, but any false science. I mean, that it should be fact based in fact and science and tests, but it's not. And that's what I think I really appreciated the book is you just kept reminding us this is the ultimate act of the state upon its citizenry, and this is how they're conducting their business. It's absolutely appalling.
It is. When you stop and think about it, I mean, this is an extraordinary use of state power. In some ways, you think of the state is created by the people for the people. This is really when the state kills, and I mean, that's what it is. And by the way, that's what the autopsy says is homicide.
Mhm.
It is an intentional killing of one human being by another. So we don't like to use that because we like to use like these little padded language, but that's what it is. And it in that sense, it's like it's the state eating its own,
Mhm.
right? Like it's the state disposing. And so it's one thing for people are going to disagree, I think, on the death penalty, but I've not encountered someone thus far that would say, yeah, the state has the right to kill so they can do whatever they want.
Well, because
You
where,
know?
I mean, this is terrible to say. Again, I feel like everything I say is terrible, but where's the motivator to do better? If you're in any other sort of realm that involves research, even like, again, the veterinarian, they have a consumer and they want to research and develop these humane ways to do things. Is it just because there's not a motivator, again, because
There's no incentive.
there's no incentive?
Yeah.
I mean, where's the incentive? And how do we get to a point where you pressure enough to change this? I'm just so overwhelmed by thinking about it. Like,
Mhm.
who do you convince that this needs to be, at the very least, science backed? You need to know what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think secrecy is a huge part of this.
Mhm.
I mean, they don't have to get better
Yeah.
because what they do is they come out and tell people, no, it went fine. And I just have vignette after vignette after vignette after vignette of like, no,
Mhm.
it didn't.
Yeah.
And, there's one place where I quote of the victim's son
Mhm.
who came to witness an execution. And he came out and said, um, yeah, I went back to my hotel room and the press conference was going on and I listened and he said, only about half of what they said was true. I wasn't expecting that.
Mhm.
And that's the nub of it, right?
Right.
I'm not expecting that. I'm expecting that in this ultimate exercise of power that it's going to be done in a regulated way in some like it's not going to be just kill them any way you want and B that people know
Mhm.
what their representatives are doing in their name and that they're telling the truth. And I like to think of this book as this is not a book where I make an argument
Yeah.
and
And
then
I appreciated that
tell you
about the
I'm
book.
right.
Yeah.
I just relentlessly document what the state is doing in our name. But I think the story it tells, and I trust my readers. I do. I'm like, I'm going to tell you all the things I found, and you can tell me where you think that's okay or
Yeah.
defensible in any way.
Right.
But, when I think of this book, I think it's a story that the story of lethal injection is a story about all the ways that the state cannot be trusted
Mhm.
with the ultimate exercise of power and all the ways that the state has covered it up.
Yeah.
And I feel like, with the death penalty, these conversations, and they're important conversations, tend to focus on whether the person deserved it. And as a death penalty scholar, I just have to say that's just half the equation, people.
Mhm.
The other half is, has the state done what it needs to do to deserve to take that life,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it's hard to walk away from this book
Yeah.
and answer that with anything but no. But
There was one moment in the book that just I had to take a deep breath because you talk about the fine line in the juxtaposition between replacing the black hood that executioners used to wear with the white robe that clinicians wear. And that reminded me, and the further conversation coming from that was how precise lethal injection has to be and everything that can go wrong along those lines. And it does in a lot of cases with lethal injection. I mean, the fact that there's a doctor at hand but is not administering the drugs themselves to fight to to the inserting the IV and the problems with that, and then just the heightened anxiety of the situation and the background of the prisoner. I mean, I never thought about it, but you detail it. I mean, the process has to be precise, and we're not getting it right, Professor.
yeah, I mean, again, this is something where I was like, oh,
Right.
myself, where it's like, I thought, and I think there's a line in the book somewhere in the beginning of that chapter, I thought, 3 drug protocol,
Hmm.
3 drugs, 1, 2, 3. How hard can this be? People, we insert catheters into people's veins all the
All the
time.
time.
And by the way, that's the same sentiment I see from courts and policymakers. They're like, come on, we do this all the time. Don't tell me it's hard. And it's like, you're not actually thinking about, you're not, really thinking about what this is and how we're doing it. And it turns out that lethal injection it has all the delicacy and need for exactness of a medical procedure, but it's been warped to change the execution settings needs. So, just the fact that, an injection would be done bedside, and it's like, no, no, that's the people pushing the syringes are non-medical prison guards, and they're doing it from another room with 7 feet of tubing. And when you ask them, well, how do you know that you're not doing it too fast, that you're not pushing it too fast and,
Yeah.
collapsing the vein or, having infiltration? And they're like, well, we're doing it by feel. And the medical professionals are like, there is no feel, you people.
Right.
And, that's lock it, right? Like by the
Uh-huh.
time the executioners were like, yeah, it's kind of hard to push the syringe nut right now. He had,
Uh,
a welt the size of a golf ball, because they had been injecting, the poison
mhm.
straight into his tissue. The vein had blown. So, well, actually, it just came out. It didn't
Right.
blow, but
Because they didn't tape the syringe down.
yeah,
It came loose.
exactly. And they tried to tape it down, but then they covered the spot.
Yeah.
So there's like all of these things that you don't think about. And then on top of it, one of the things that again, I was like, oh, was we're talking about a massive overdose. I mean, what we are doing with lethal injection is we are poisoning people to death. That's what we're doing. We are forced poisoning them to death.
Mhm.
And, if that sounds, emotional or, triggering in some way, it's just because it's a testament to how good of a job lethal injection has done at kind of hiding what the essence of this is. But, we're doing this we're pushing a massive overdose into these people's veins. And who are they? Well, a lot of them are former drug IV users. They do not have the best health
Mhm.
histories. They've lived very rough and tumble lives, so they're generally unhealthy. I don't comment on it, but I just document.
Right.
Oh, right. You had to wheel him in on a wheelchair, or you had to prop him up with a medical pillow because he was on oxygen and you didn't want him to choke while you're killing him. It's like you don't think about that. That like if one were devising a way to execute prisoners, that is not my project, but if one were, the last way really that you would ever choose is a method that requires successfully pushing a huge overdose into these people's veins.
Yeah.
Okay.
Question?
Yes. We spend a lot of time at Good Faith Media on this podcast talking to different folks about issues of justice and in all manners. I will say this is the first conversation we've had about this specifically, so I'm just a little taken aback. And we usually have some form of where do people go from here? And I feel like there's people that are going to listen to this episode who, like us, we hadn't thought of any of this before, but now what can we do? Where are our marching orders? Like, what are you doing in your field or in your lane to help affect change? I know you've obviously written a book, which is wonderful because now people can read for themselves what's happening. But what do we do
Yeah.
next?
Okay.
What's our assignment, Professor?
That's
What's our
such a
homework?
good question, Missy. It really, really is. And when I do book signings, the thing I write is pass it on.
Mm.
I write pass it on because I think it's when you are reading this book, at some point, if not many, you will be like, what? No,
Yeah.
and you'll be like, that's outrageous. Let me ask you, did you tell someone else? Were you talking to a friend or something? You said you would not believe this book that, we're reading and this crazy thing I read. I didn't know any of that. That's what I'm hoping for.
Mhm.
I want you to write your governor. I want you to write your legislator. I want you to pass it on. I want you to lend the book to a friend. I think there's so many dimensions on this. I think it speaks to redemption and the power of the human spirit.
Well, Professor Corinna Lain, thank you so much for joining us. The book is Secrets of a Killing State, the Untold Story of Lethal Injection. You can pick it up wherever you pick up your reading material, and I think this is an essential read. It really is. It's a heavy read, but you do a great job just laying out the facts, as you just said. And it's just, I was really surprised by a lot of things I read, but also inspired to act and to do more. That we can do to bring this to an end because it's appalling. So, but Professor, before we let you go, we've got one last question that Missy asked all of our guests, and so I'm going to hand it over to her.
Professor, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So, in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
I would say my more to tell. I have so much more to tell that I have a website. And it's it's all housed there, but it's CorinnaLain.com. So it's CorinnaLain.com. And there you will find book club questions for every
Great.
chapter.
Nice.
You will find facts about the death penalty along with their sources, because I am a researcher.
Mm-hmm.
And you will find a tab behind the book that has my personal testimony on it, which is really, really incredible. It went beyond just the call to write the book. But, all of those things are there. And I'll be on a book tour. I'm taking a professional leave in the fall, and we've got 30 cities in 82 days.
Wow.
I am literally driving across mostly the South, but I'll be back in Oklahoma. But I'm driving across the country, doing talks to young people in law schools and at bookstores and centers for ethics, medical ethics, and all kinds of places. But I'll be on the road all fall. You can find that too. on my website.
And we will put a link to that website in our show
Thank
notes.
you.
So we appreciate your time. And again, more so, thank you for writing this book. It certainly is enlightening. And it's a hard read, but it should be essential reading for anybody who takes their faith seriously and takes our government seriously, and especially, as you indicated, the ultimate act of power by the state. So thank you. You're welcome back anytime, and we appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Mitch and Missy. Just thank you for shining a light on my work. I so appreciate it. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.